Hey guys, I'm Elizabeth McCravey, a website designer and business coach for entrepreneurs and your host for the Breakthrough Brand podcast, the show that's all about pulling back the curtain on how to actually build a successful business. I don't skim the surface around here. If you want a deep dive into the nitty-gritty details of what it takes to run a successful business and stand out in a crowd, you're in the right place. After creating a multiple six-figure-a-year website design business in my 20s, I'm ready to share everything I've learned and everything I'm still learning because I believe the keys to building a thriving business should never be a secret. Here you'll find episodes that are actionable, direct, and fun, like friends chatting business over coffee, and a fresh, honest take on the reality of being an entrepreneur. If you're ready to master online marketing, branding, website design, mindset, and business strategy, then this is the podcast for you. It's time to build your breakthrough brand. Let's do this. Welcome back to the Breakthrough Brand podcast. We're talking hiring, outsourcing, terrible hires, how to delegate, contractors, employees, all the things. I'm really excited about this episode. I'm literally answering your questions, and I'm going to do a few episodes coming up on teams and hiring, and I fielded a bunch of questions you all had sent in on a variety of surveys that I end up putting out in my business, which random tip, guys, survey your audience. You can get so many great content ideas this way that are truly like the stuff people really want to learn and hear. So that's what this is. In this episode, I'm answering your questions specifically about my team and how I do team and how I have systems in my business and some of that kind of stuff. And soon I'm going to do another episode where I'm answering similar types of questions, but more like advice for you all about teams in your business. But right now we're talking about my team. And there's so much to learn here from what other people do and have done in the past. So I hope you'll enjoy seeing into my journey of growing my business with a team. I'm putting all the questions I'm answering in the show notes if you want to read them to hear the questions we're in for right now. So working with a team and not doing it alone is a huge part of how I built my business. It's how I'm able to work less hours and still grow. It's a way I keep business fun and fulfilling and enjoyable, like not doing it completely alone. And I want to teach you what I've learned on this subject through doing it the last 6 years of my business. And if you want a little insider peek, this is the topic for the new course I'm working on. You can get info on that at elizabethmccravey.com/teams. There's some info, just a little short page about it there. And later, once the course is released, if you're listening to this in the future, you can go join the course there. But this course is your step-by-step plan to hiring help in your business and doing a business with a team day in and day out. So it's hiring, and then it's like the actual logistics and systems of working with a team. And when I say team, to clarify, I do not mean 10 full-time employees. Most of you, and myself included, do not actually need that type of team in our business. So I'm talking about building your small and mighty team that might just be one part-time contractor that by working with, you're able to take things off your plate that you're not that good at or that you don't want to do and ultimately grow your business. So we're not talking about building giant teams with 401ks. We're keeping it a lot more simple than that. And so many of you I know want to scale your business. You want to scale your offers, scale your time. You're asking me like, how do I do this? And there's obviously tons of ways, but this is, I would argue, one of the best ways to do so. Whether you're wanting to hire your first person as an assistant, maybe someone to help in your inbox, or maybe you already have a small team and you're like, yep, Elizabeth, I'm doing this. I'm with you. Like, this is so helpful and it's helping you scale your business. But you're like, hey, I want to know how you do it. I want some like ways to make my systems better and to kind of like, clean things up a little bit. This episode is going to so help you, and so will this course. So anyway, I'm about to get into the questions, but let me just finish by saying this. On the page, elizabethmccravey.com/teams, I'm going to link to it in the show notes, but I have a survey there, and I would be so honored if you would take it. Your answers to that survey are helping me know what exactly you want in the course and like what questions you have around this topic. And I'm also pulling questions for podcast episodes from that survey. So for those of you who have already filled it out, because I mentioned this a few episodes back, you actually might hear your own questions answered right now in this episode. So that's really fun. But yeah, go there, elizabethmccraby.com/teams. To get on the wait list, get more info on the course, and fill out that survey. Okay, so let's dive in. I'm going to be answering 7 questions literally from you guys all about my team. All right, the first question, how many members do you have in your team? So to answer this, the first thing I want to say is when we think about the people who work with us in our business, I like to think of there being a core team, which would be like the inner circle, and then the outer circle, who are people who you still could consider a team, right? Because you're working with them semi-consistently, but not all the time. And they might be people who you work with as needed on projects. It's like a team, but kind of outer circle is how I like to define it. So the core team, though, is the people who are at your team meetings. They're probably in your project management system. And then the outer circle might not be. They might not be at your team meetings. You might be running things more on their system instead of them being your project manager, all of that kind of stuff. They are your team, though. And all of these different people play different roles and are all super important. So to kind of clarify that, I see those as like 2 separate groups. So the core team and the outer team, right? So my core team is 3 people plus myself. So 4 of us total. And the 4th person was actually just hired last month. So that is very new. And we're currently in her 90-day training period right now. It is going great so far. That's something I've done with every person I've hired, is doing a 90-day onboarding kind of system where we have benchmarks, we have trainings, all sorts of stuff to help them get acquainted with the company and learn what their role is. It works really well. It's so funny that I'm talking about this right now because literally this morning, now it's the afternoon as I'm recording this and I'm back home, but this morning I was in a coffee shop outlining the new course, and I actually just finished outlining the onboarding module, which is just a few videos. I'm keeping it really short and like just with literally what you need. But in the course, I'm teaching my 90-day onboarding system with literally templates that you can just straight up do the exact same thing if you'd like to, because I think it works super, super well. So anyway, with her, we're in the 90-day onboarding period. And like I said, there's 4 of us. And the inner circle people do things like customer support, design work for our own graphics, setting up blogs and podcasts, doing some stuff for client work as well. Emailing, designing stuff for my courses like slides and things like that, marketing strategy. I mean, I could go on. There's a lot of different things that are being done. And then my outer team, though, is bigger. So I have a bookkeeper I work with consistently, an accountant who I work with consistently, a podcast editor who edits every single episode you guys hear, a video editor, a copywriter. My mother-in-law also works within my business and plays a really important, awesome role. So I would add 6 people onto that right now. But then there have been other seasons where it's more than that. So like where I'm also working with like, say, a Facebook ads team and things like that. So it can change, right? But right now, I would say it's about 10 people, myself included, who sometimes have a hand in the business. And to be fair, sometimes someone like, let's say our video editor, he in the past has done like IGTV videos for my podcast when I've had guests on, and I haven't given him a project in a while because I haven't done interviews in a while. So like once I get some more interviews coming back on this show, I'll have more work for him. But then there's someone else where in this current season of business, like my copywriter, Emily, she and I have been working on tons of projects this year so far. So it really just kind of depends on the season with some of those outer circle team members of like how often we're working together. So that's kind of the long answer to that question. It's more nuanced, and so grateful for every single person that I get to work with. It's so cool even answering this question and thinking about the awesome people I get to have help from. And if you're someone who has ever asked me on Instagram or on one of these surveys, Literally was looking through questions. This is one of them. How are you doing it all? How are you balancing this? The answer is I don't, which I love. I know people love to say that of like, oh, I don't do it all, but I really don't. Like that's your answer. Like right now, all these different things, the moving pieces of my business have other people helping me do them. And to start, I started with one person, which we're going to talk about that in some of these questions as we keep going right now. But like, you don't start with that many. You start with one and you figure that out. Then you add another if that makes sense. And maybe long-term for you, your core team is going to be you and one other person, and that's all you need. And maybe you have 3 contractors you also work with outside of that. Like, that's perfect. You don't need a big team to have a really successful business. Truly believe that. Okay, so that's question number 1. Let's talk about question number 2. Are your teammates full-time or part-time employees, or are they independent contractors? So this is a great question. And to say first, I'm going to tell you what I do, but you have to figure out what's right for your business. And I am going to teach about this in the course because I do think it's a confusing topic that we're all looking for clarity and help on, of like knowing, what do other people do in this situation? So in my business right now, at the time I'm recording this, everyone is part-time and in a contractor position. I am the only employee of my company, and I actually am an employee. I'm on payroll. My business is an LLC, and I file taxes as an S Corp. And so that's how my business structure is set up. Again, you have to do what makes sense for your business and stay within the IRS's rules around this topic. If you look up anything around employees and independent contractors, there's a lot of different stipulations for someone to be considered an independent contractor, and like figuring out what role someone is in and staying within those guidelines is really important. So you want to make sure you're following those rules. And again, I'll have some trainings about this in the new course. But even with that said, most of you listening are probably in a place especially when you think about that first hire, to where you should be starting with a part-time independent contractor. That's what, again, in most cases, that was what will make sense. And again, that's what I'm doing right now in my own business. And I think some of the scary legal aspects of hiring can often hang people up from hiring. And I really hate that, because I've talked to so many people where it's like, they know they need help, but they're like, oh my gosh, but how do I pay them? But like, how do I set this part up and that part up? How do I train them? How do I make sure I'm staying in these guidelines? There's all these types of questions, right? And it hangs you up from ever taking action. So my biggest piece of advice is take action. Don't let this stuff scare you. It's not as scary as it seems, and you can start small. So yeah, that's my answer to that. And definitely stuff worth reading about as you do start your hiring journey, like looking into the guidelines, the differences, all of that kind of stuff. Okay, question number 3. These are kind of 2 questions combined. They're both basically asking the same thing. So what is the first thing you outsourced and hired for? And then a different question, but again, similar thing. What did it look like for you when you had first started outsourcing? So talking about how things were back then. So first, before I actually get into the answer, I early in my business had a few different times where I hired someone to do a little something here and there. Sometimes it went well, sometimes it didn't. Some of those things are honestly not even that memorable to me at this point. Like early on in my business, for example, I hired my sister to do something randomly, and that was did not go great, because it's like family working relationships wasn't a good fit for us. But I've had some moments like that. But then when I think about like real, more serious hiring than that. Before I had a team member I really stuck with, I went through quite a few people doing different things. The first time I hired someone that felt more of like a serious hire, so like not my sister helping with something, was when I had been in business about a year and a half, somewhere in that range. And the first job I hired for was help with design work for my clients, which I actually would say it was a mistake, which I'm going to talk about that in the question after this one, talking about wrong hires and terrible hires. That's the next question. So I'll talk about that in a moment. But at that time, I was hiring for design help with the branding in particular for a client's project, but also with some smaller design stuff for clients. Like, for example, I had a designer I worked with who did a PDF download design for one of my clients. So like I'd come up with the branding and guidelines, and then they had their content they provided, and she designed it into a PDF that they could give out to their email list. And then there was another one where the person was selling the PDF as like an ebook design. So that was the thing I worked with. I also hired someone at one point specifically to work with me as a designer for work with my clients. And our first project went badly, which again, I'm going to talk about that in a moment. And then we didn't work together again after that. And there were a few other things here and there. But when I started this podcast was when I really made some first hires that I would say were like the right move for me. And that made the most sense, and that kind of stuck more so. So that first person in that season of my business was that I hired someone in a virtual assistant role to help with emails, podcasts, blog post editing, setting up show notes in WordPress, some kind of like the back end stuff for having a podcast. And that went well. I did eventually end up stopping work with her for a variety of reasons, which I'll talk about some of that in the course because I am going to teach on I'm doing a whole video about my own experience with hiring. Just if you want like a deep dive into my team, like what everyone does, how we found each other, all of that. I'm doing a video on that. But anyway, that was a good step at the time, even though I did end up stopping working with her. And then also around that same time that I'd hired her, I hired my podcast editor, Natalie, who I still work with over 3 years later. And so that was another early successful hiring experience for me. So that was what it looked like for me back then. And I'll add to it too, that like thinking back in those early days, a lot of it felt messy. And I honestly did not want to be a boss, which is so crazy. I'm going to have to do a whole podcast episode about this. I've talked about it a few times, but I really value independent work. It was one of the things that attracted me to owning my own business was like kind of just doing my own thing. I actually like working from home. I'm not bothered by being home alone all day in my office. And so because of that, I didn't love the idea of having a team for the longest time. I kind of saw it as something that might hold me back, was kind of going back into more the 9-to-5 vibe, which was not what I wanted. It's funny to think back on that because I've so changed my perspective and did change pretty quickly in my business. But early on, I was like, oh my gosh, I don't want a team. I just want to work solo. And I've learned a lot since then. If I could do some things about those first hires over again, I totally would. And I'm hoping that this course will help you, whoever decides to take it, to do hiring for the first time in a way that ultimately gets you more time back and sets you up for success with great systems for the long haul. But yeah, I think like you'll never regret getting started trying. And those early hires that maybe like didn't go as well really prepared me for later to do hires that did go a lot better. So yeah, that's kind of what it looked like early on in a nutshell. Interrupting this episode with a suggestion for the small business owners listening. Ever wonder what you should do for healthcare when you and your spouse are both self-employed so there's no work-provided health insurance to participate in? Well, when my husband Adam joined me in the entrepreneurial job space over 4 years ago, we joined Christian Healthcare Ministries instead of getting traditional health insurance. And it was the best decision for us, especially in these years of growing and raising a family while also running multiple businesses. CHM is a health cost-sharing ministry and is a faith-based alternative to health insurance. We did tons of research before choosing CHM, and if you know me and Adam, you know we are all about doing the math when making big or small financial decisions. And even though it's not insurance, CHM shares 100% of eligible medical bills, which is more than the typical 70 or 80% of medical bills paid for by insurance companies. All sharing is determined by the CHM guidelines, which you can check out before and after joining. And for the mamas and mamas to be listening, you truly cannot find a better healthcare option for maternity care. I had a vaginal delivery and a C-section and birth center care and hospital care between my 2 pregnancies and births, and it was all 100% shared for. And outside of birth, we've had our share of emergency room visits and procedures as a family, and those costs were all shared by members at Christian Healthcare Ministries, leaving us only paying our monthly contribution. CHM is less expensive month to month than insurance, and because there's no network, you can choose your care with whichever providers best fit your family. I seriously just cannot recommend Christian Healthcare Ministries enough. You've got to check them out. Go to elizabethmccravey.com/CHM for more information. Also putting that link in the show notes, elizabethmccravey.com/CHM. Now back to the episode. All right, question number 4. Have you ever made a wrong hire? And have you made any terrible hires? So those are 2 questions I'm grouping together, and they actually are different. So questions are wrong hires and terrible hires. So I have made wrong hires. Generally, though, I don't think I've ever made any truly terrible hires. I would say for the most part, there's one story I'm going to tell at the end of this, but for the most part, I would say everyone I've ever paid to do work in my business has been a really talented person who's great at what they do, who I really respect. But I do think I've made wrong hires, especially early on, which I just alluded to again in that last question. And so I want to talk about that. Again, I have 2 little stories here, but what I did early on, basically was I realized, hey, I could really use some help. My business is growing. I need help with some stuff. This is more things that I have time for. And some of it was like, I realized like I'm not the person that needs to be doing this particular task. So I realized I could use some help, which, by the way, a question I get asked often, and I'm actually seeing in some of these survey questions, is how much money do I need to be making to hire someone? And I'm going to talk about that in the course. But I want to say quickly, I think that's like the wrong question, because it doesn't have to be that you have a certain amount of money that you're like promising it's going to always be. So you don't need to be, in my opinion, at a certain revenue point necessarily to start hiring someone as a contractor who you're paying hourly, with the understanding that the hours may fluctuate based on the amount of work you have. So you're not necessarily, you don't have to lock yourself into like this much money every single month. It can be more so a job based on projects and based on the work you have coming in. So anyway, everyone I hired really early on was under that system. It was hourly, or I was paying a specific amount for that project. And then when there was another project, there would be more work to do. So again, I think that's a really smart way to do this. If you're not sure financially, if it makes sense for you, but you're like, you need help, and having help would ultimately help you scale and make more money, right? So back to the original question though, of wrong hires. I would say I did it right in the way I was hiring, but I was hiring for the wrong things early on. So my business was growing a lot. I had a big demand in my client workload. So I had a lot of clients coming in. I was able to consistently raise my rates on client projects, but I was booking a good amount of clients. So hiring an assistant designer seemed like it made sense to me. And maybe for your business, it would. Again, so not saying this is like advice across the board that would apply to everyone. If you are a designer or whatever, apply it to your copywriting business, photography, whatever it is you do. But for me, I thought an assistant designer seemed like the right thing. But then what I realized ultimately when I hired for that is that what I actually needed was to let go of some of the other stuff I was spending my time doing and instead hold on to doing the design work for my clients. That's what I should have done. But instead, I was trying to hold on to things like responding to every single email I got myself, writing every blog post and then adding it to WordPress every time on my own, designing all the graphics in my business, things like Pinterest graphics and stuff of that nature to promote blog content back when I was just blogging, doing small design stuff for clients, like making an email signature or a PDF download, onboarding a client. All of those were ways I could use help, but I was trying to hold on to those. And I was like trying to give up the thing instead. That was what I was being paid the most for, which was my design work. But I think the reason I did this, and maybe you can relate, but was because in my mind, it felt easier to hand off design stuff than to hand off all the other random stuff that needed systems behind it and that felt more complicated. That was really what was taking up my time. So I think if I was able to do it over, I should have started with an assistant who maybe knew some design stuff, because I think that could be helpful, but wasn't doing the client work with me, but instead was doing some of those other things that was like taking up time. So basically what happened was I hired a few different times designers to help in that way. And then I would not like the work they were doing. And so it was kind of a waste of time for all of us. And ultimately I was paying them to do some work for the client and then I was redoing it. And yeah, it just didn't work great. So that's my wrong hire story with a core team person. And again, all those designers were super talented, nice people. So it's like, again, it was more of like my bad decision-making and what to hire for, and kind of like growing into the CEO role of giving up some of those things like the inbox. A second wrong hire, which is a whole nother story. But recently-ish, a few years ago, maybe like 3 years ago, I tried working with two different bookkeepers. So I was stopping like, okay, I'm going to stop doing books myself. I'm going to get help with this. So I tried working with two different people before ending up working with the bookkeeper who I work with now. And one of them, the situation was not horrible, but it wasn't great. It didn't go well. And then the other person though, it went so poorly. I will not forget. It was during tax season too. So that like made it feel worse. But I had multiple times where I was just crying literal tears over how tough the communication felt, how we could not get on the same page, how I felt like stuff was getting messed up. And, I was having her come into my business and feeling like none of it was going well. So, again, that helped me learn though, because then when I finally found a bookkeeper that was the right fit for me, I knew what I was looking for. I knew what questions to ask. And so that was really helpful. But yeah, those are kind of my stories of wrong hire hires, and all of that. And again, all those wrong hires, the tough decisions you make with that ultimately help you grow in your business owner role. Failing is not a bad thing. Failing helps you grow and learn. And so honestly, in a lot of ways, I wouldn't change any of that because I think it helped me figure out what I did want and ultimately hire better long term. Okay, this will be a quick question. This number 5 one. Does your team design your templates? I thought that was an interesting one. So I was like, I want to answer this. So it's a fast answer. No. I design all of my own templates. I also design my own website. I write all of my own products too. And like, obviously I record them and create them. But for example, like Booked Out Designer, I wrote that entire course myself. I came up with like, these are the lessons, these are the modules. Here's exactly what I want to teach on. So it's all teaching from my brain. And for this new Teams course, I'm doing the same thing. I'm writing it all myself. I'm coming up with it all myself. For this podcast, I write every outline myself. And then I'm obviously the one recording it. I know a lot of businesses though can take on sometimes a ghostwriting type of thing with courses, where like someone else writes it, or even for podcast episodes where someone else writes the outline. And then the person who's the face of the company is the one who like delivers it. That's not what we do. I'm doing all of that. However, I can tell you I have help in those areas. So I have help with course creation. I have help with my podcast. I have help with templates. So to give some examples of how I have help in those areas. So with my design business work, I don't design any podcast graphics for this show that I share on Instagram. Abby does that, and she does such an awesome job with all the podcast graphics. She also does our Pinterest graphics. Whenever I ran Facebook ads, I was not designing those. Our email graphics, I don't design. Basically, design things with my branding. I often am not the one doing, but then the branding that we work within, I did create myself. So it's like so the colors and fonts and logo and all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of a mix, but generally speaking, which kind of feels weird to say, like, right, I'm a designer, but I'm not doing all the design work in my own business. But that's what makes sense for us, and it works super well. When it comes to template stuff, when Showit comes out with a new update, by the way, Showit's had some great new updates lately, but when Showit comes out with a new update that causes us to need to change things on the template, I typically am updating like 1 to 2 templates to kind of figure out like, okay, what all is needed here? What are the changes? Like generally speaking, what pages does this apply to? So I might do 2 templates myself. I record a video to show what needs to be done. And then a team member, Stacy has done this last time, does the rest. So it goes into the rest of the templates and makes the changes. Within my courses, I don't design the slides. Like I said, I come up with the content. I write the lesson notes. I record it all. And then Abby designs the slides based on the notes I write. So I write out like, here's the text to go on each one. And then she designs it and puts it all together as well. So puts it with my audio and all of that, which we actually might be recording the Teams course in a little bit of a different format, but that's kind of how we do that part. So, but then with templates, going back to that original question, I design them. I'm the one that comes up with everything from that angle and sets it all up. And I really love being the person who does that in my business. So hopefully that gives you a little glimpse though into how we work on all of that stuff as a team. I really love our processes. I love being able to make all the products I sell, but I also love having help in all the details of getting it out there to you all. Especially when we think about something like course creation. Like I want to be able to spend my time like doing the brain work of outlining and coming up with the concepts and then recording, and then have help when it comes to parts like getting it all set up. All right, question number 6. I really liked this one. Okay, and these are, again, 2 questions combined. How often do you talk to the people on your team? And then what does communication look like on the day-to-day with the team? So I probably talk to people less than you think. It was actually kind of interesting for me to read this question. I was like, how often do I talk to people? And for those of you who are like I was when I first started my business, and maybe you think you don't want help because you like being independent, I would say I still work pretty independently overall. For one, my team is remote. So none of us, I live in Nashville, obviously. No one else lives in Nashville. We live all over the US. And so we're all working pretty independently. We do have team meeting once a week. And sometimes we skip a week. So I feel like, again, going back to like, this is a small but mighty team. We don't have to meet every single week to get stuff done. So occasionally we'll skip a meeting if it feels like there's not enough to talk about there. But typically we meet once a week and we do those meetings on Tuesday. And then I'll meet one-on-one probably one time a month with each person typically. And then right now, as I'm onboarding a new team member, we're meeting a bit more to really get in like trainings and talking and going over all onboarding stuff. So that's kind of how the meeting aspect of things work. Again, so it might be less than you think. We use Voxer to communicate for quicker things or things that need to be talked out. So we have a group Voxer. We'll also Voxer one-on-one with people. When I was on maternity leave, Abby and Stacy were Voxering together, just them without me, to talk over certain things. We also use Loom to make a lot of videos for things that are longer than you, like where you need a visual to explain, right? So it might be a really long thing for you to write out, but maybe we're needing to share a screen to teach something or to explain a problem or ask a question. We use Loom for that. I personally really love Loom. I use it for all sorts of things in my business, but one is definitely communicating with team members about stuff that like we need to visually talk out and like look over something. Like maybe it's me providing feedback on, let's say, some emails for email marketing. Like I might make a Loom to like talk through and show like, okay, here's what I'm thinking about this. Here's my question on this, that sort of thing. And yeah, there's so many tools. Voxer and Loom, Slack's another one that's awesome. Having a project management system's another one that are all going to be so key when you're working with a remote team where you guys, even if you live in the same city, but when you guys are both like working at home and you're not like sitting next to each other in an office all day, you really got to utilize those types of tools. And I'm talking about that in the course too, like some of the key tools and how we use them. But I'll go ahead and share there that Voxer and Loom are two big ones for us. And then mostly though, we communicate via written word in our project manager. So that's how we keep most of the communication happening. And going back to the like beginning of the question though, of like how often do I talk to people? There are some days where I actually don't message with anyone. Like where literally the whole day I could have not talked to anyone on my team. But usually every day I'm touching base with someone in some capacity. Stacy probably the most because she might have a question in our inbox of like how to respond to something or something that needs my attention or something I'm just voluntarily going in and like kind of, I'm going to help by responding to this person. So I might say something to her in there. But yeah, generally speaking every day, but like some days there is no communication. So yeah, we make it work. I think the systems we have around it works well for me as someone who does like to work a bit more independently, you could say. Okay, so number 7, I'm already to the last question. Okay, this is a good one. Was it hard for you to give up the reins in your business to other people, especially fully when you were on maternity leave? So delegating on my maternity leave and delegating in general, I would say are two different things that I felt differently about in both those times of my business. Like, so for me, delegating on maternity leave, that was not that long ago for me. I recently recorded some podcast episodes about my, how I planned my maternity leave and then what the experience was like. So definitely go back and just scroll back a little bit to listen to those. But for me on maternity leave, that actually felt pretty easy to me because I'd already been delegating for a while. And that was when it was just me, Abby, and Stacy. I really trust Abby and I really trust Stacy, who I was delegating things to. We had both been working together. All of us have been working together a while already. Abby for a couple of years and Stacy already for a year when that happened. So I also knew that if they really needed me for something, they would let me know. And both of them are so kind and so encouraging, and we all really care about each other. And I knew that they desired for me to have that time away as a new mom, and they let me know that. So maternity leave felt simple and natural in that regard. It was just harder turning my business brain off more than anything. And again, I talk about that some on my maternity leave episode. But the delegating part actually went really well and was not hard for me to hand over the reins, so to speak. But delegating in general, before something like a maternity leave. So talking about delegating in those first few years with a team, it is hard. It really is hard at first for most people. And I would say it's an art, not a science. And there's a lot of trial and error involved with delegating. You have to give people a chance to fail, basically. You have to ask them to try, give them really great instructions, and allow them to do it not the way you want it done, and then give some critique and then keep going and go back and forth. It's a lot of back and forth of all that. It's a lot of training, a lot of being a manager and learning for you of how to be a manager versus an employee in your own business. It really does, like, your role changes some when you go from like you're doing everything to like other people are doing some stuff now too. And you're more so overseeing and approving things and giving direction and that sort of stuff. So really like taking on a coaching role as the CEO of your business and coaching your team members. So anyway, I think it's a learning process. Delegating is, and I've gotten better at it over time from where I started with it all. And I'm going to do another episode at some point on this podcast where I'm just going to share like all my best delegating tips. Because again, like I just think it's a learning experience. And some of the tip would be just like you have to start doing it. And then you're going to learn through trial and error. And you're going to learn to trust the person more and more and then give over more things. But I'm also definitely covering this in the course of like how to become a better manager, how to step into that CEO role when it comes to leading employees, and how to be a coach too within your business to help your team really get the job done. But yes, delegating and training someone on how to do things, it also all typically takes more time than if you just did it yourself. So that's something else I think we can get hung up on with delegating is like, it can feel like, oh, if I just do it myself, it'll just take a few minutes, right? But if I give it to someone else, it's going to take me 10 minutes to tell them how to do it. Then I have to wait on getting it back from them and blah, 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 blah. But then in the reality of it is like, that is so worth it because you have to think about it's like one time of the teaching and the extra doing and the waiting, but then you're setting them up to be able to do it themselves long term. Anyway, that's just a little side tangent there. But yeah, talk about that in the course. I'm going to continue to talk about that more on this podcast. So those are the 7 questions I have for you today. And like I said, I'm going to do another episode kind of covering some of the questions you guys sent in. I want you to send in more questions. Again, go to that survey, elizabethmccravy.com/teams to take the survey. I'd love to hear your questions. You might hear them answered in a podcast episode or in the course, but I'm going to do an episode soon where I'm going to answer questions that were not about my business specifically, but just about team stuff more generalized. But yeah, I hope this is helpful and I hope this gets you excited for the new course. I'm so excited to teach on this topic and to show you how I've been able to scale my business with a team. So go to elizabethmccravy.com/teams to get more info. Again, once the course is released, all the info will just be on that page. But for now, at the time of recording this, it's a wait list and a survey that I'd love for you to take. It'll just take a few minutes, but I'm asking some questions about what all you would like to learn. So that's it for today, and I'll be back next time with more business advice for you, and I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day and week. All right, bye. Thank you for listening to this podcast episode all the way until the end. I appreciate you being here. And if you enjoyed this episode, then I want to invite you to check out my website template shop too. Over on elizabethmccravy.com, you'll find show it website templates that are easy to use, strategically designed, and created to help you book more clients and customers. Maybe your current website is really boring. Maybe it's a challenge to update, and maybe even it's that thing that you really feel like is just completely holding your business back. Your website needs to be strategically and intentionally designed in order for it to convert your viewers into raving customers, and that's exactly what my M-Shop templates do. So these are pre-made show it website templates where you can plug and play your content into it with ease and then get started with a website that's designed to actually help you make more money. These templates are designed to be SEO friendly on the back end, and they're not just pretty, but they are very strategic and with all the strategies I teach on this podcast. And best of all, they're easy for you to set up all by yourself. So shop them at elizabethmccravy.com/shop and come join the M-Shop family of hundreds of happy customers. And as an added perk, you can use the code BBPodcast at checkout to get 10% off any template as a thank you for being a part of the podcast family. So that's BB Podcast for 10% off any template over at elizabethmccravy.com. And if you love this podcast, don't forget that you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts so that you never miss an episode, and leave a rating and review for the show wherever you're listening. Share it with a friend, share it on Instagram or Facebook. That's a great way to support the podcast and get the word out. All right, I'll be back next week with another new episode.